welcome to another episode of the Tell Not Show. As always, we are your hosts. We have the fabulous and wonderful Kirsha Fox. She is the author of Some Deception, The White Leaf Child, and Keeper of the Demon Skull.
Newly released.
Newly released Keeper of the Demon Skull. Very exciting third installment of the Deception and Justice series.
Yes.
She's an avid reader, gamer, and homeschooling mom of 4.
All right. And my co-host is Julia J.K. Allen, editor, author, and author coach. She's a fantasy and horror author who loves to put magic in everything. Thank you so much for joining us. Our guest tonight is Christina Halverson, who spent her childhood knee-deep in ivy and dense woods. Avid reader and lover of whimsical tales like The Never-Ending Story, she can be found at wild coffee shops and antique bookstores, if not glued to her couch playing video games. She's currently releasing her debut novel, Bound by Darkness.
Yes, welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm.
We're very excited to get to meet you and hear all about your author journey. So what got you started with writing, and what has your journey looked like so far?
Sure. I would say probably what got me into writing was, you know how they used to do those like scholastic fairs in like elementary school when they used to be like really, really popular?
Yes. Best week of the year.
Literally.
I loved those fairs, yeah.
Yes. I used to like beg my mother for just like $5. I was like, just give me $5 and I'll browse the aisles. And it used to just become like a tradition where my mom would hand me $5. I'd go in and I'd pick out just a random book to read. And then when middle school kind of hit after that, I've always been like an avid reader. I realized I was like, well, why don't I try writing myself? And so I started writing, but I started writing poetry is what introduced me, which people always think that's kind of weird because you don't really start off with poetry. But I thought I was like the next like poet. And I was like, yes, I'm so great. And then I had my family read, and they're like, it's not that good, but I did it anyways. And that was kind of my outlet into the writing space. And then over time, the poetry kind of divulged into fantasy the more that I got into video gaming, because that's something that I'm very passionate about. And once I learned that video games aren't always have to be, you know, just like the cut and paste, like, hey, you do this move, this ends. Like, oh, video games can have stories. And when I got into like that fantasy aspect, I found out I was like, oh, I really love fantasy, and I really love the intricacies of, you know, world building, the characters, how everybody plays a role. And that's kind of what really got me into the space of writing. So I've been writing now fantasy for about 10 years. But this is the first time I've ever actually put it out in the open.
Oh, well, congratulations on making it to publication. That's a very exciting, also very nerve-wracking phase of the process.
Right, yeah. For sure.
Yes. No, I also kind of, I dipped my toes in many different types of writing, but poetry was like a big thing for me in high school. Like I loved writing horrible poetry in high school, so I can really relate with your journey.
Everyone needs to go through it.
It's just a phase. Yep. Yeah.
It is like I like my big removing the artist from the art. Pablo Neruda was like one of my favorite poets in high school, and so he was big on the like melancholy and like, but like my attempts at writing it were very like trite and just like, you know what I mean? It was just so contrived, like trying to emulate the melancholy without being like sappy and sentimental.
Yep. I always was like, oh, okay, let me like look at Shakespeare and how Shakespeare writes all his stuff, and then I was like, yeah, I can do like Shakespearean type poetry, and I was like, no, I can't. Not at all.
Oh, right. Yeah, the form poetry can be kind of fun. Well, I always viewed it as a challenge, and so like writing form poetry, I could like if I had writer's block, I'd be like, well, let me try and write a sonnet, because there's so many rules you have to like kind of, you know, follow and get it to fit into, that it would kind of like work around my writer's block to do it that way. But it is a very much a huge mental exercise of like getting every little piece to fit into the puzzle.
And I'm right there with you with the video games. My favorite genre are the fantasy games where like what you do impacts your ending, impacts who dies, who lives, who's romanced. We've actually interviewed Bruce Nesmith before on this show, who wrote for the Elder Scrolls, a lot of Morrowind and Skyrim. And like, he's just mind blowing. And like, but it was a different perspective of having to write when your protagonist could be anyone.
Right.
It was a lot of like lore and backstory and creating the world itself, which like was just so much fun. But I love the books that feel like a D&D game or feel like a video game. You're there, you're immersed, and what happens matters.
Yeah.
No, very, very much. I think D&D very much kind of like inspires a lot of what I write because I'm big into the D&D space. So like Critical Role, I mean, Final Fantasy, like any of the Final Fantasy games, Hollow Knight, right, has such lore. If you've never heard of Hollow Knight, it's a great game. But it's very lore based. And so I really wanted, to write into a space that, you know, fantasy, sometimes I feel like it can get divulged from the lore. And I wanted to bring that back into the fantasy space because I feel like that's where the roots originally came from.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So can you tell us a little bit about your writing process? How do you go from like idea to finished draft?
Sure. It's a hot mess.
That's what it should be, honestly.
Right. What writer isn't? I would say I do a lot of kind of rough drafts of the plot. I feel like I always kind of first I need to know how is it going to end. I feel like you can't start writing a story or plotting it out until you know how your book you want it to end. So I always figure out what ending I want, and then of course sometimes it might tweak a little bit because characters always kind of divulge off on their own, no matter how much you try not to. But once I kind of do that, then I kind of write down just like tiers, almost kind of like acts, and be like, hey, in act 1, this is what I want to happen. Act 2, this is what's going to happen. Cool. What's my climax? What's this? So it's very loose. Then once I have my loose draft, I'll go in and start adding small details. Because for me, a big element is I love plot twists. So I always try to plan my plot twists as I go before I start writing. Because I love the books that kind of give you little hints and you're like, well, that's kind of weird. Why would they mention this? And then you go back and you're like, oh my God, I get why they mentioned this. So I can always plan those out and then I just start writing. And I try really hard not to edit as I write. That was some really big feedback that I was given, is to just write and then edit as you go later on. So I kind of try to stick to that kind of loose kind of writing plan. Yeah, as far as my writing process.
Okay.
Yes, lots of good insights in there. I would agree with whoever told you don't edit as you go. It works really well for Kirsha. Kirsha does a fabulous job, but I think
it makes me slower, but it's part of my process.
Yeah.
If you're going for speed, definitely don't edit as you go.
For me, it really like kind of halts my creativity because like for me, I have to be like not judging my ideas at all, and to switch back and forth between the two is so tricky for me. But it does work. You know, everyone has their own process. That's why we love talking about writing processes so much on this show, because there's so many different ways to do the writing thing. And we love sharing that with other people and inspiring other people to try new things in their writing process. Do you think that characters or plot, like, what do you figure out first? Do you figure out characters or plot first?
I would say probably I figure out the characters first. I think it's my love of D&D that I really love to dive deep into the characters, even small things that my readers would probably never even know about the characters, is like, okay, so what's their favorite food? Well, I can tell you right off the bat, but like I like diving really deep into who the characters, because I think it helps me almost write, because if you don't understand your characters through and through, like what are their fears, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, I think you have a hard time sticking true to the character. And then I think the plot comes after, once I've already kind of dived deep into who each character is.
Yes. I really love characters, like falling in love with characters. So that's the most exciting part of my brainstorming process, is getting to know the characters as well.
Do you have a favorite author, and what do you think they do best?
Man, I have two. So I would say traditional. I love Suzanne Collins. The Hunger Games were probably some of my favorite books, and I read them probably once a year, and I just always gravitate towards the story, the characters. Like, I think every single character she's written in that story has a great character arc, and that's something that I always look for is, you know, books that have great character arcs, and everyone has an arc too. And then also I read a lot of manga, so I'm very big into the anime space. So Mizuho Kusanagi, she is the author of Yona of the Dawn. She is one of my all-time favorite authors. I will never stop talking about her books because, one, her plot is great, but she also dives really deep into her characters and makes sure that all of her characters play a role in the story.
Amazing. So it's kind of like that perfect blend between plot and character. Oh, I love that. Yeah, I should check that out for sure.
And when you add in the art too, it just perfect.
Yep. And she's such a great artist.
Yeah. Yes.
The other nice thing about graphic novels, like that too, is that it's broken up into the visual space. So it kind of takes some of that, because sometimes I find when it comes to like reading for pleasure lately that my brain is so tired, or it seems like such a big task. So it's really great to be like, oh, graphic novel format, I can take it in these bite-sized chunks and I can stop whenever, and it doesn't feel like so much of a commitment.
Yes.
So I really love, I just got a graphic novel recently to read over, because I was just like, oh, this might be the perfect workaround for like my reading fatigue that I've been going through.
It takes like what I do most, like 90% of my reading is graphic novels or manga, because I just find it easier to digest.
Oh, nice.
But I also love that, you know, the characters and the plot isn't also just put on the back burner. Like, yes, the art is beautiful, but they also take time to put all of this in there too. So I feel like it adds like a unique element.
Right. It's definitely like the complete package to everything. I love that. And the Hunger Games books are so good. I think I really enjoy how they she not only writes the characters really well, but the consequences are there.
Yes.
Because it was like right around the time when Hunger Games and Divergent and stuff were first coming out. That was like really the first time that you had people writing about PTSD and the after effects of these big plot points in these books, where it's just like the characters going through things, but they actually have the things happening to the character and them going through it and going through like the panic and all of the stuff that's involved with these like big traumatic events. I feel like before in fantasy, it was just like, oh, big traumatic event, we gloss over and we move forward. But there was never that reckoning of like processing what happened.
Yeah.
And so I really love that realism that got added with books like The Hunger Games and stuff too.
Same,
yeah. Those books went to some pretty dark, horrifying places. And yet you could see, like, I love how fantasy holds up a mirror to real society to show you how far things can get, and people will still cheer, you know?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You make a good point, right? Like, I think it's that double-edged mirror, and you make a good point too, that she was one of like the first authors to, you know, almost express mental health issues in her books.
Right.
That was missing from a lot of like fantasy elements of like, yes, all these big, huge things happened, but what did the characters feel? What did the characters develop from? How did this make the character go from A to character B while also still staying the same?
Right. Yeah, showing that growth, but also showing like the messy aspect of that growth, the ugly underside of processing everything.
You survived, but you might not be okay.
Yeah.
You're just not going to be the same. Right. Exactly. Which I love that. And I think that, I don't know. Like, I love that. Like I said, it's just like felt really, it added realism to the story of being like all this stuff is going on, but you could see it impacting the characters, which made it so much better. Okay, sorry. I went to go ask a question and then I just started laughing. Don't mind me. Anyways.
I was going to say, having been, it sounds like you followed a similar story to my own, where you're sort of a hobbyist writer for years and years and years before you finally were like, this is it. This is my debut novel.
Yeah.
say you've learned from that process, from taking so long, but like taking your time to really get it right?
Yeah. I would say, I don't know. I've learned a lot. I think a lot of it had to do with my own self-confidence, because it's different, being a hobbyist writer than it is actually showing people you're writing. Because you always wonder for the longest time, is this just a hobby, or is this something that I could do outside of work? Is this something I could potentially make my job? And so I think I learned a lot about myself in just a weird way throughout the writing process, less of like my writing, but learning to trust myself and build my own self-confidence, which is really funny because I mean, that's the whole goal of like certain fantasy books is, right, the character goes from one to another. And I felt like that's what I kind of learned because I've been writing for about 10 years, and I've had this story on a back burner for 10 years. And I finally got to the point where I was like, well, I'm older. What happens if I just do it? All right. If nobody reads it, but it's still something that I love to do. So I feel like it took a lot for me to be like, okay, I don't want to make a profit off the book. I just want to do this because I love writing. And I think it took time to develop that almost and develop that skill. And I think that's what's kind of the biggest thing that I've learned in this whole writing process.
Yeah, there's two things that really makes me think of. One is the idea that a lot of writers have like that story idea they're so passionate about. It's their big story that they want to tell, but they're not necessarily ready to tell it when they first start writing. And so it's a really great thing to do, of being like, I'm going to keep this story on the back burner. We're going to build up our skill sets. We're going to build up our practicing, all of that stuff. And then I'll be able to tell the story that I'm really passionate about with the skill sets that I need, and really build that up. And so that's really a great strategy for people. And the other, oh my gosh, I lost the other one. But yes, it's a really great strategy of being like, oh, I really am passionate about this story to tell, but I'm going to wait and tell it when I'm ready to tell it. So I love that you revisited that idea later on, and being like, I have the experience, I have this age, some time under my belt. And so you were really able to like tackle that first story.
Yes.
When we're younger, imposter syndrome, as well as like fear of judgment, really holds us back from a lot of things. I think when you reach a certain age, you're like, you kind of free yourself from that. You're like, it really doesn't matter. No one's judging me the way I think they are. Like, and if they are, that's on them. I'm going to do this for me, And who knows, someone might like it. Someone might like this story.
Right. No, I love that, because I feel like a lot of authors struggle with imposter syndrome for sure. But just, like Kirsha was saying, when you get older, like the cares kind of fall away from you in this beautiful, liberating way. And you're just like, I don't care if nobody likes this but me. Yeah.
I'm an adult. I can do what I want.
Doing it too. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
Yes. So congrats on getting to that stage where you're
congratulations.
Okay with being you and putting the story that you were, working on out there. It's a good answer.
Thank you. But yeah.
Okay.
What do you think is, what do you think is the most important part of writing?
I would say the most important part of writing is making sure that you're also having fun. Because I've heard a lot of like my other indie author friends, they get burned out very quick. And I think it's because, once you put out a book, it's like, okay, well, I have fan base. I have all these things. I have to get book 2 out in a certain amount of time. And I'm trying not to fall into that space, because I want to make sure that I'm also having fun and making sure that I'm taking time to, take care of my, own mental health, taking care, keeping at my own pace, and making sure that of how I got into writing first is not lost.
Yes, no, I love that. Because they often say, no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader. Like, if you're not enjoying the process, the reader can kind of pick up on that a lot of times, and the writing will feel kind of lackluster or like missing that oomph. So I love that you are being very intentional with your goal of to like continue to enjoy what you're doing while you're doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it is very easy to be like, oh, I need to do marketing. I need to do all of the business side of authoring, and then you're neglecting the joy that made you an author in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's all too easy to start comparing yourself to other people who are more productive, or
Right.
they're faster. They require fewer edits, more, like there's some people who are just amazing, frankly, that they can be so prolific, but you can't compare yourself to them and go, I must not be as good as they are, or my books aren't going to be as good as
Right.
they are. It's like,
Right.
it's really hard to let that go.
It sure is.
Yeah, it is. It is very hard not to compare. But then the only I try and just compare to like my past self, which is really fun sometimes because it's like I have a horrible memory. So sometimes I find old writing and I'm just like, who wrote this? Where did you come from? I have no recollection of you at all. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So it can be very fun to find old writing, and sometimes I'm just like, oh yeah, there's a reason why you've never liked it.
There's a reason I stopped, yes. And we often joke about how we'll be bent over our keyboards, we're crying, we're pulling our hair out, and someone is like, why are you writing? And you're like, because it's my favorite thing. This is
right.
It's my favorite.
This painful, torturous thing is the thing I enjoy the most.
Torturous favorite thing.
Yeah, I told my husband, I was like, I'm gonna go as my first draft for Halloween. So
right.
Right.
Oh my
we all laugh uneasily.
Yeah.
Yeah. For sure.
Oh, that would be such a scary costume. Yeah.
So how do you make time for writing? Since everyone's pretty busy these days, most of us have jobs.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't really struggle with finding too much time. Thankfully, I have a very supportive husband who understands, like, when I come home after I get everything done, I'll just kind of sit and I'll just kind of write. That's like my favorite thing to do, at least right now, is I'm always just like on my computer. I'm either editing, I'm pulling up, different things to like research. I love researching for books. I think that's probably a fun part too. But I don't know. I don't have too much time, but I would say for those, right, who do struggle to find time, I've always found anything that I need to get done, I always set timers. I think it helps ground me. I don't know if that's just something that I love to do, but I love putting up timers and being like, okay, here's my timer going off. Let me take 30 minutes to sit and do something that I love. I think it's very easy to get lost in the day-to-day mundane tasks. So I think always kind of doing almost like, right, how we mentioned earlier, like almost like a visual, or like hearing that kind of like timer go off is like, okay, let me take that time. Everything will pause. It'll be okay, just for like 30 minutes and sit down and write.
I love that. I wrote most of my stories in writing sprints because I'm like, I can procrastinate like nobody's business. And so like knowing that there's that built-in accountability of I have to tell somebody else how many words I wrote, and that 15 minutes will actually make me write for those 15 minutes. And so like I love timers and sprints and things like that. I did find it very interesting that you said that you really enjoy research. And I want to know, like, what's your secret? Because I hate research. Like, I love learning new facts. I'll try interviewing people. Like, I try to interview people about places to make it more interesting to me, to do the research part. But, like, what are your tricks for research being fun?
I don't know. I've just always, I think I'm in the science field. So I just love research. And I think that goes hand in hand of what my current job is. I would say find the small things. So like I'll research, cause my story is very Celtic inspired. So I do a lot of researching like old, Celtic, like folklore. I do Celtic, different like plants, varieties of that. So then I can pull and be like, okay, well, this plant means, this in their language. So why don't I pull this and make it different to add it as an element to the story? So I try to find twists and turns where it's not like, oh, I'm just sitting here doing like boring research, but applying it to how I'm going to put it in the book. Kind of keeps me motivated for it.
No, I like that. Like, it's kind of like gamifying. Like, I'm going to learn this fact, but then I'm going to play with how to put it into the story and make it more interesting. I love that. Yeah, no, that's great. That's what I wanted to hear. So tips, yes.
How do I make researching fun? Well,
yes. No, I love that. I mean, they even like have those apps to like gamify writing where you can like fight a monster by writing your story out. Like, that sounds amazing.
Yep, I gotta keep the brain happy somehow, keep it interested.
Yes, right, yeah.
I think those are wonderful tools. For myself, I would find it entirely too distracting. I'm already like very distractible
Yeah.
as it is. So
Right,
it doesn't work for everyone, but I love that for anyone who can make use of it.
Yeah.
All right. So do you have a favorite part of writing?
I would say I love the world building aspect of writing. I think it goes hand in hand with the research. I love, really diving deep into the world, but then it also comes a caveat because then I can spend too much time world building and not actually getting to writing. And that's where I sometimes will find myself stuck in that rut of like, okay, I need to stop building my world and I actually need to write it. So I would say that's probably my favorite part. And then putting those elements into the story. But yeah, I do find myself sometimes getting stuck there rather than actually writing it.
You know what's funny is I hear that again and again and again from D&D players. We are the worst at that. We spend so much time on lore and world building that we don't actually write
the backstory of the characters and stuff.
Yes. And like 90% of this isn't even going to make it in the book, but it's just nice for me. But I'm like, okay, now I actually have to put it in words.
It informs the world and how they react and their whole belief system. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. What is your least favorite part of writing?
I would say probably like my least favorite would have to be probably the writer's block. I think that's everybody's least favorite part of writing. And then also I would say scenes. Like writing scenes out is not my forte. It's just I get mundane and I'm like, okay, how do I describe this scene of a forest? Two different how do I describe it differently? And so then I'm like, okay, now I'm just sounding almost like I'm rebuttaling the same thing. So those are probably the two things that this is my least favorite about writing.
Sure.
How do you deal with writer's block when you get it?
The biggest thing that I found is I will put on a new show, which it feels very weird, but I'll put on a new show or I'll read a new book. Because a lot of times I'll get new elements from the story and I'll be like, oh, well, I read this, so let me pull this from here. Or I'm also really big into music. So I have playlists for like all of my characters. So if I get stuck on a certain scene that's supposed to be under a character, I pull up that playlist and then it almost helps me get back into that headspace. Be like, okay, this is, the character's music. I get in that headspace and that kind of helps me write a little bit better. Might not always be the best, but at least it keeps the momentum going.
No, I think that's a wonderful trick to have a playlist to like get, or a way of getting into your character's mindset, their headspace. I think that's a great idea. I just never occurred to me to like have a playlist for my characters. But
yeah, it's really nice because then you can pull up. Because I love the world building, so you can pull up different songs and be like, oh, this song fits this character, and then I'll pull songs and be like, oh, this is a great song for their character arc. So then it almost helps when lyrics pull from the lyrics and be like, oh, okay, well, I can add like this element to the story.
Yeah, what I really love is figuring out people's ghosts, the things from their past that haunts them. And it just occurred to me I could make a song for their ghosts. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to like.
Yeah, no, that is a perfect way. You're refilling your creative cup.
Yeah. No, exactly. Watching a new show, listening to new music, anything like reading a new book, like you are refilling that inspiration part of your well.
Right.
That's a great advice. I think it's time for Kirsch's favorite question, maybe.
What has been your most significant writing victory so far?
Yay. I would say probably my most significant one was I recently sent out art copies. And I was very nervous to send them out because it's the first time that it's out in the world that anyone's ever read it, besides from like the few beta readers I had. And I got feedback from one woman who messaged me and said that my story helped her. Because I write very dark, gritty, and it's very into mental health space. And she said my main character really helped her because she's dealing with almost the same things that are going on. And that felt such like a huge accomplishment. I was like, even if I don't sell a single copy, I was like, that made the whole, the whole thing worth it, that someone got something out of the story. And that's just what I wanted, was someone to feel a connection to the characters and understand that, yes, I understand where you've been through, because this character has done the same thing.
Yeah, no, that is such a gift when we get that feedback from readers of being like, your story touched me or your character touched me, and like, yes, that is the most amazing thing ever. So yay! Yes, no, that's fantastic.
That is definitely a writing victory.
Yes, for sure. So I know we talked a little bit about how we break writer's block and like music influences you, but like what else influences your writing?
Oh yeah, good question. I would say D&D is a big aspect. I play, I watch, I read it. And so it really influenced, because I read a lot of fantasy books now that the side characters are side characters, and I didn't want a single side character in my story. I wanted every single character to play a part. And I think that influences a lot. I think anime plays a really huge role in my writing as well, because anime is known for their really cool and unique plot twists. And so I wanted my story to have very cool and unique plot twists that were very thought out, that you don't realize until the very end. But when you go back, everything makes sense. And I would say probably those are the two biggest things that have influenced my writing. And hopefully will continue to influence my writing as I go along too.
Yes, no, that sounds amazing. Plot twists. I love a good plot twist. The idea of like orchestrating one though terrifies me.
Yeah, it's not fun.
My jam. That is my whole thing.
Yes. Intricate plot is definitely Kirsha's side of the fence. I love it though. I love reading it. It's just the thought of weaving all of that together is very intimidating.
I found it's easier to figure out how you want the plot twist to happen, and then go back and plant your seeds along.
Yes, the foreshadowing is so important. Yes.
And that's why you start from the end. You know where it's going, and so you're able to stretch it there. And sometimes you discover things along the way, and you're like, oh, it's almost like I had it in mind the whole time.
Literally, yes. Yep.
Right. Yeah, that's so nice when like the pieces fall into place and you're just like, oh, it looks like I knew what I was doing the whole time. That is a good feeling. Yes, I love it. Did we ask this question? If you could give a new author advice, what would you give them?
Oh, you didn't ask that one yet. I would say take your time. Because there was a lot of behind the scenes things that I did not account time for. And so that was kind of a very much learning process. So I would say take the time to learn the process of, once you finish your book, how do you get it out into the world? I think that's the biggest thing that I really had to research on top of already researching for the book, was how do I take it from, okay, it's in, like Readsy format. How do I take it from Readsy format to book format? And I felt like that was a very big learning curve that took almost like 4 or 5 months, literally, to learn how everything works and what are my options? What options can I not get? What are the cheapest options available?
Right. Yeah, no, when you're publishing your own books, everything's time or money to learn or pass along to somebody who already knows how to do it. So yes, totally understand that struggle of like the nitty gritty, like publishing details and all that stuff.
It's so the hard is the fun part. In movies, they'll show the author write the end, and then they smile and a book appears in the next scene, like by magic.
Right.
Yeah, you have to do the cover. You have to pick the cover and the formatting, and what
the spine and
blurb, and what what do you put in your there's a lot of back matter and
front matter, all the table of contents, all the
who do you publish with? How do you distribute? How do you market? Should you do pre-orders? Like, how do you set that all up? There is so much to learn about the business of publishing. That is excellent advice.
Yes. It's something that I had to learn the hard way, but I was like, okay, it comes with time. And so I'll feel better about the second book when it drops. But I was like, at least the first time, take your time.
Yes. There's no rush. The only deadline you have is self-imposed, right?
Yep.
So yes, take your time and really familiarize yourself with what you're doing and be careful, because it is not fun when you're like have to go back and like re-upload those files and wait for them to get approved again and all that. Like if you do it too quick the first time and you miss something,
everything takes so much longer than what you think.
It's a nightmare.
Yep, it really is.
Yes. All right. So that I was asking to lead up to my favorite question of, do you have any advice that you hate when it comes to writing? Like you just think it's, okay.
Yes. The phrase, it's like, just write. I see it everywhere on like TikTok, whatever, when people are like, just write. And I'm like, okay, well, in theory, yes, I can just write, but there's a lot that goes into just writing that I think gets put on the back burner. And so people are like, oh, well, how do you get through writer's block? And they're like, well, just write. And I'm like, okay, well, I could write, but it's not going to be good. I'm not going to feel inspired. I'm not going to feel creative enough to actually write or put anything good on the paper. So that's like my number one that I hear all the time. And I'm like, well, I can't just write. I have to have something else to motivate me to write. So I feel like if you don't have that motivation piece along, it's not actually going to work in your favor.
Yeah, I think the other side of that too is that like just write. Like if you have writer's block because you're burnt out and you've been pushing yourself through the burnout process like way too much, just writing is not going to help, right? It's going to do the opposite and like contribute to the problem overall. So yes, we are not fans of absolute, right? I think in general on the show.
Well, I think that just write is something that a pantser might say. But it isn't good advice for a plotter. I'm definitely a plotter. Again, I can sit down, I can write stuff, but it's mostly my characters staring at each other going like, what do we do now? Which like, I have to know what I'm doing. I have to know what the scene, what the goal of the scene is. I have to do my research. I have to know where they're going next to get them there. Otherwise,
absolutely. I have to have a goal when I sit down to write as the author of being like, I'm developing this character relationship or I'm inserting this plot device or foreshadowing. Like I have to know what I'm doing. Otherwise, like I just have existential dread staring at a blank screen. You know what I mean? So it's just like, if I know what my intentions are, I'm able to write, but like just waiting for those words to just fill my brain, that's not gonna work very well.
I was going to say, I would rather write 100 good words that I feel really confident about than 1,000 words that I'm just going to chuck in the bin after, that aren't any good.
Right. We don't want to like, futile effort is not what our aim is.
Don't chase a word count if that's not for you.
Exactly. I'm always good about saying, like, instead of just write, just daydream. Like, if you don't have anything, just sit there and daydream instead. Daydream about you want to write, and then hopefully something will come to you. I think that's more concrete,
agree with that.
Something plausible rather than just like, oh, just sit and write. Oh, I'm just going to stare at the screen, like you said.
Yes. And like I said, especially if you're like trying to push through, you're really uninspired, you're burned out, like you don't want to push through that. You want to give yourself that day of rest. I think we all can recognize there's just some days where the writing's just not working, it's not clicking, it's not happening well. It's okay to just daydream, watch a movie, read a book, do something else, kind of rest. Get that break. Yes. Okay, I love that. Yes. So we want to thank you so much for joining us tonight on our show and give you the opportunity to let everyone know where they can find out more about you and your books online.
Of course. I do have a TikTok. It's Bound by Darkness. And I do have Instagram as well. Same hashtag Bound by Darkness. My book, Bound by Darkness, is releasing November 25th. You can go ahead and pre-order the Kindle online through Amazon, and then I'll be having some paper copies available soon. And then I'm also doing some limited edition hardcovers that I will be getting hopefully soon. And then those will be available on my TikTok shop as well.
That's exciting.
Cool. Yeah. Limited edition hardcovers.
I know. I'm lucky that my sister is an artist, so I got like the family discount. So I was like,
yes. No, amazing. I'm gonna have to check that out. I love good art.
Her TikTok is Hollowly. So HOLLOW and then Y at the end. She's amazing.
Oh, perfect. Yes. Okay. Thank you so much again for joining us on the show. It's been really great talking with you.
Of course. Thank you guys so much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
Yes.
Yes. And thank you to everyone listening along at home. Remember, there's more than one way up a mountain. And if you're interested in being a guest on the show, you can find us on social media at The Tell Not Show or email us at thetellnotshow@gmail.com. Thanks again for watching.
Thanks again for listening. If you enjoyed the show, consider subscribing and liking. We appreciate all the support. Julia J.K. Allen is an author, editor, and coach and can be found at hijinksrudder.com.
Kirsha Fox is an author, avid reader, gamer, and mother to 4, and you can find her at kirshafox.com. Thanks and see you next time.